So here we go. I like playing on the internet. I've got plenty of time these days. And one of the things I've looked at doing is finding unclaimed property. More for me, but a lot for other people too. So some things come up. Some of you are probably saying, what the heck is this? Okay, so first of all, what type of property is unclaimed? That's usually the first question. Okay, stocks and bonds, savings accounts, security deposits. If you were in an apartment and you were supposed to get a deposit back, but maybe didn't. Contents of safe deposit boxes. What I've mostly found, though, are uncashed checks. And there are situations where you might have gotten a check from a company and you dropped it behind your bed, or you accidentally threw it in the garbage, or they tried to send it to you, but you moved. And those types of things might happen. Now, what is not property that's unclaimed is real property, land and houses and items like that. Okay. And as far as it goes, how does property become unclaimed? You might wonder. Well, first of all, there might be lost or misplaced checks. And despite the graphic there, it's not bounced checks. It's checks that just somehow never got cashed. You might have a bank account or a brokerage account that after a certain number of years, and it's different in different places, if there's inactivity, the bank declares it as inactive, and it might try to reach you one more time, but after that, the property is unclaimed, and your bank account then is an unclaimed property. Now, what happens typically in the situation where there are checks that don't get cashed or get lost, or the particular person hasn't done any activity in their savings account or their stock brokerage account, what should happen by law is the company or the agency will attempt to contact the owner. They're supposed to send out a letter to you and say, hey, we've got this particular check, or we've got this particular account. Can you tell us, did you actually cash it? Or did you actually use it? Or is it lost and we need to send it back? Now, personally, if anyone ever asked me, is it lost? I'd be immediately going, yes, it's lost. I want it again, whether or not I'd gotten it or not. And there was one situation where I don't know if I had gotten it or not. I was contacted by a particular brokerage company and said, oh, no, I didn't. And they sent me the money. But if you either say, well, if you say, I didn't get it, I give it to me again, they will reissue it to you. Here's a new address. Maybe you moved and they didn't have a forwarding address, but somehow the letter got to you. But if you don't respond to the request that the company sends out, did you owe it? What happens is the property or the record of the property is remitted to the state. these companies, let's say it's Pepco, and they had a refund check for you that you didn't cash. But what happens is Pepco will, after trying to get a hold of you, they will say to the state, here is a list of people who have property that is unclaimed, and here's a check for the amounts that they have not claimed. What the state does is it has then a website that lists, here is all the unclaimed property by person, sometimes has your address, often has the address, sometimes has how much it is, sometimes doesn't, it depends on the state. And they list it, and it's up to you to find that particular property. And if it is, if you find it, you can then write to the state, or you can do an online claim in some states and say, hey, this is mine, and prove who you are. And then you get the money or the property. Now, there have been questions, does this work for the federal government too? And I've got to tell you, maybe, and some of the government agencies have websites set up that if you want to look for it there, you can. But what I found is in the federal government agencies, they charge you for it, and the state agencies are free. You just go there, you can look, and you can claim it. And I'm going, okay, I'll do the looking at places that don't charge me for it. If someone else thinks they misplaced something, a tax refund, they can go to the IRS site and make a request and see if that happened. Now, other than just liking to do stuff on the internet, how did I get involved in finding unclaimed property? As background, I'm a certified public accountant, or I was before I retired, and then figured I don't even want to use my CPA certificate anymore, so I'm not going to pay for it. But as an accountant, I worked in the accounting department of Detroit Public Schools. And while I was there, the schools got notification from the state government, hey, you probably have some money, you haven't declared anything in ages. And so I was charged not charged, it was my responsibility to find out what checks were long outstanding and needed to be resolved. And while I was in the department, you had to go through the records of and at that point in time, the amount of uncashed checks on the bank reconciliation, I don't know if you do your own bank reconciliation and have a list of uncashed checks, but the ones at Detroit Public School, it was a gigantic amount of them, and many of them for several years outstanding. So I had to go through the process of gathering all the information, and then also sending out the letters to people saying, do we need to send you a new check, or did you get it? Or if you don't respond, we have to get it back to the government. The weird ones that I found were the payroll checks. And there were a lot of people who hadn't cashed payroll checks. Now, I don't know about you, but number one, I don't want to have a check if I'm getting payroll. I'd rather have it direct deposited, although there are reasons some people don't. But number two, really, you're not cashing your payroll check. And there were like hundreds of thousands of dollars of checks outstanding that we had to remit to the government and have people do it, because people didn't even respond when we asked them, hey, do we owe you this? So I had to do that when I was at Detroit Public Schools. Later on in Michigan, I was the controller in another smaller school district for Oxford Community Schools, and I had the same responsibilities. One thing I for sure did when I was there was finally the state came out with a law saying you don't have to issue checks to people. You can either have it directly deposited or you can give them a debit card and put the money on that. And that totally eliminated the need for outstanding checks, which was great. But in the meantime, there still might be companies that hadn't cashed checks and you had to contact them as well. So after doing all of this for these school districts, I'm going, so if I send in money for them, there might be money out there for me. So I figured, hey, maybe I should take a look at the websites and see if I'm getting anything back. I did, at that point when I did it, I did find for my daughter one account at like Charles Schwab that had been inactive and had been, what this is called is the money is escheated, and it was escheated to the state for like $5,000. And it's like, okay, I guess she better get on that. And she did, and she was very grateful to me for that. And after doing it for me, I'm going, if I can do it for me, I can, and I have done it for other people. I mean, does it always work? Of course not. Some people do cash all of their checks, which is great, but others don't necessarily do it. Other people don't also necessarily want to take the time to go through the computer to look for things. And sometimes, even though you think you've done it, well, maybe if another person looks at it, they might find something that you actually hadn't found. And I found that I do a pretty good job of going through computer records. So when I do this, I use various information. And not a lot. What I use the name or names of people that they might want to find money, what state or states they're in. I mean, personally, I have lived in Indiana, Minnesota, Wisconsin, New Jersey, Michigan, and now Maryland. So I've been a number of places, and the possibility of something falling through the cracks could definitely happen for me in one state or another. Likewise with other people. Maybe the city and address, and that might narrow it down. You might have a name that is very common, Bob Johnson. There might be a whole list of Bob Johnson outstanding items. And so having the city and address might also narrow it down. But here's a couple things. I would never ask for Social Security information. I do not want your information. You can, for the people that I would do it for, I would put the onus back onto them to request the information and provide that. When you have to report to the state saying, hey, this is for me, the state often knows it by your Social Security number, and you may have to issue a copy of your Social Security card to prove that that's your number and that you relate to the person who the money is set aside for. And in other cases, you might need additional information. For my son-in-law's father, I found a listing of his father they were at the same address. Now his father had passed away. And once you have that, you have a situation of, okay, now what do you need? Well, you need a certificate of death, you need a conservatorship or power of attorney, you have to prove all these things. Some people say it's not worth it. Well, if it's $12 or $15, you're probably right. In his case, this one was several $1,000s. And he gave me a nice commission check. Do I ask for a commission check? No. Is it appreciated? Oh, certainly is. But in that case, it was definitely worth the rigmarole to get to it. And certainly I do not ask for any credit card information. So there's nothing like that that would happen. Now, let me try to stop the share and let me try to share again and go on another screen. And okay, let me see if I can move this. Okay, here we go. All right, what I've done is there are several sites that you can go to. There's one general site that I've seen that I don't use a lot, but it's sort of like this allows you to go to various states. And you can see here, it allows you to search in Alabama, Alaska, Arizona, doesn't allow you Delaware, Georgia, or Hawaii, those, Connecticut. So it's sometimes hit and miss which ones you get there. And also through this site, and this site is missingmoney.com. And you can do an overview if you want to look at various states. But typically what I do is I go through the individual states. And all I do is I Google state name space unclaimed space property. So state name unclaimed property, and I get to that spot. For example, my original state of Indiana. And you get to a site like this, and here it's called indianaunclaimed.gov. Claim yours, and then you can put in your name. If I put in my name, Shoeback, and I don't even put in a first name, city, zip code, or property ID and do a search, you can see this is a whopping $9.20 for my daughter, who is having had problems substantiating the particular address, and said, well, for $9.20, I don't want to bother. And that's fine and dandy for her. If I went for another friend in Illinois, and his name was Daniel Goldstein. Now, Daniel Goldstein is a common name, and there are many, many Daniel Goldsteins. Now, I happen to know that his middle initial is L, and there's not necessarily there's a number of Daniel P and ones in various places, but there was this one Dr. Daniel L. Goldstein that has something under $100. Well, is under $100 $5? Is it $99.99? Not sure. But with regard to that, I mentioned it to him. He thanked me. He asked if he also asked if I get a commission. I said, well, on under $100, probably not. And he's going to then click on the claim, and then it allows you to do that. Theoretically, a person needs to do it within, I believe it's 60 to 90 days. And in many cases, you'll see on checks some sort of limit. It might be that, it might even be 6 months. As far as it goes, if you don't, what will happen again is nothing until there are some statutory limits how long you can keep them outstanding until you report it to the government. I thought for payroll, it's like a year. And for businesses, it's anywhere from 3 years to 5 years. And after that, they have to check up on it and then go through the S-sheet process. So when does one need to cash it? Well, that sometimes depends, and you probably will see it on the check. When should you cash it? Probably as quickly as possible, just to make sure it doesn't get lost.
All right, Fred. So I've been checking the chat here. I think that's your only question so far. If anybody else has questions and wants to pop them in the chat. And we're almost out of time for Fred. We're going to start the 2:30 session in a few minutes. We're checking in on Facebook Live to see if there's any comments or questions there. So Adrian says, I can see my grandmother's name and how to proceed. Yay! Glad that's helpful for you, Adrian. And Fred, thank you so much for your presentation. I mean, free money. Come on now. Who doesn't want that? And it seems like very little work on the research end. Can you share that website address, that overall one that you had?
I will put it in the chat.
Okay. And then, so starting there is great. So Tina says, thank you, very informative. And Fred's typing it in the chat, and we'll read that out for our friends over on Facebook Live as well. Okay, so Adrian says she doesn't know how to proceed, and I know that Adrian, you are in the Silver Spring Time Bank, so I would recommend contacting Fred through the Silver Spring Time Bank to follow up with him. And Christine says she did a search for her mother-in-law and husband, both deceased. Well, I usually face much trouble following up. So I guess that's her question, is following up on somebody who's deceased but owed money.
Okay, and it's especially for Maryland, there is a specific form that's listed on the site to fill out. And typically what it's going to need is some proof of the person, the possibly Social Security, certificate of death, possibly also conservatorship, power of attorney to be able to do it. And again, sometimes it can be a hassle. Like I said, in my son-in-law's dad's case, well worth it. Other people have said, yeah, for $5, don't want to do it. But that's what you have to go through.